Hello multi-mullets, I'm Ralphie. Welcome to the Bothy, welcome to Ralphie Review 931 Extras, in which we're going to take a wee trip down memory lane. Because when we make our journey in the whisky world, we tend to have a journey, particularly when we kind of look back in time, usually with nostalgia, because the consumption of alcohol triggers nostalgia, it triggers emotions, it triggers sentiment. It's a common theme that you'll find in whisky events where people get very sentimental and very attached to certain moments in time with certain whiskies. And it's happened to me quite a number of occasions over the years. And I've just finished reviewing this 18-year-old Bunnahabhain. Official bottling, bottled at 46.3%, unchill filtered, natural colour, so an integrity bottling, and all should be good, but in my opinion there's some less active casks in here whose influence is negative. So it's really brought the score down. And yet a few years ago when I first reviewed this, and sure, it was partly because my senses were a little bit less critical than they are now. But hey, that's forgivable because whisky was certainly a lot cheaper than it is now. And certainly one of the most expensive Bunnahabhains I've ever bought. And I remember back in the old days that they brought out a bottling called Auld Acquaintance. It was 34-year-old Bunnahabhain, the oldest official bottling they'd ever done, and it was selling for £140 a bottle. And it was magnificent stuff. Now a significant collector's item. But I bought a couple of bottles of them, one of which I opened and consumed at my late father's wake. And the other bottle I sold at auction, and the money I got I put towards buying a barrel of whisky, because it's part of the journey, it's part of the experience if you're prepared to take the risk and put your neck out a little bit and do things slightly beyond the comfort zone. But I have to say that most of my time with Bunnahabhain has actually been very comfortable, because in fact I've got a couple of bottles out of my stash just to introduce to you, to show you which Bunnahabhains I have in my collection for drinking, not for selling. And I've also got this. So I'll start with this. This was given to me on a black bottle Bunnahabhain tasting night. This was back in the early 2000s, very early 2000s, when Glasgow's Whisky Club was just getting up and running, and someone happened to mention that, oh, by the way, they've got a representative, got one of the salesmen. This was the days where they actually still had the honesty to call them the salesman, and that's where they are. So they're saying, well, we've got a salesman going to be at the Park Bar on next Wednesday, during the week, midweek, basically pouring out some free samples. And because I happened to be out for a nice West End walk in Argyle Street in Glasgow, and I went into the Park Bar about 8:30, and there was the salesman, suit and tie, looking absolutely bored to tears. And I went up and I says, how's your evening going? He says, well, a wee bit slow, but you know, it's early yet. Once folk have had a few drinks, they'll be coming up for their free samples, because that's what always happens. He said, giving me a wee wink. I said, fine, well, you know, can I have a wee sample? And he said, yeah, what do you want? Black, well, do you want some black bottle? I said, yeah, that'd be good for starters, but I'm certainly keen to try some of your Bunnahabhain. At which he point says, oh, wonderful, we've got the 12-year-old. And basically, this is what he had. The bottle shape has never really changed over the years. But the classic green bottled Bunnahabhain, and this is a later bottling, by the way. It isn't one from 2002. This is probably about 2010. But bottled at 40%, and this was the version after the Westring Home Poem one that they used to have in the front label. But very, very charismatic, under the radar malt, which was a big firm favourite in the bar that I used to go to in Partick called the Smithy, where I'd have it with a pint of Younger's Number 3, which was my absolute favourite pint at the time. I tried a few of the lagers, and Tennant's Lager, to be honest, which was the big lager at the time, I quite enjoyed it, but it didn't have the body and the feel and the substance of the Younger's Number 3, which unfortunately is no longer being made, apart from special limited edition type versions for beer festivals. But they had the little leaflet, pamphlet things inside, and I don't even know why I'm mentioning that, because a lot of whisky bottlers have these wee leaflet, pamphlet things, but at that time, you know, I'd buy a bottle, I'd actually take the time in the old days to read through it before it just basically became too disingenuous. And I recognised it, the flavour, the style, this unpeated islandness of it. Big popular brand. I mean, the only reason it was in the bar that I usually went to was because a lot of Highland people went there who'd moved from the West Highlands down to Glasgow to get work and a few more opportunities. But anyway, back to the Park Bar. So we got chatting, and he says, you know, I really appreciate having a chat. You clearly know about whisky. So I chatted about Glasgow's Whisky Club, and I said, you know, if you'd like to arrange for someone to come along and give a presentation, we'd really appreciate it. He said, oh yes, I mean, we've not had much dealings with whisky clubs, in fact, but we've heard there's a few just starting off, and there's a few of, you know, a few more people doing stuff on the internet now. And I said, oh yeah, that's, well, you know, you've got to start somewhere. I think I probably had about 300 subscribers at that point, but I wasn't going to labour on that. I was there to taste the whisky and just have a casual chat with a guy who he was in the whisky business and happened to have a job at the time with Burns Stewart, who owned Bunnahabhain. And we chatted a wee bit about the warehouses, because he'd been up to visit the warehouses, plenty of storage space, plenty of stock, but he really didn't know much about the casks. So I was kind of giving him a bit of information, he was giving me a bit of information, and eventually he said, well, I really appreciate it, would you like this? So he gave me a nice little thick card map, there it is, of Islay, showing the distilleries at the time. So there's Kilcairn there, Machar Bay, Kilcairn, not to be confused with Kilcairn, but the original distilleries, Bunnahabhain, Killila, and here we are, Ardbeg, Lagavulin, Lafroig, they're all there, but it's definitely already a kind of dated timepiece representation. It's one of these things you stick in your fridge, or you pin up on the wall in your whisky corner, and then eventually it starts to age and then you get rid of it or something. But the guy, I enjoyed that evening because people were coming up to him and saying, have you got any tequila, mate? And he's saying, no, it's whisky. Oh, what kind of whisky? Scotch whisky, you've got the blended and the single malt. Is that blended the bourbon? Is that the bourbon? That's what people were asking. He says, no, it's a mixed mash bill of grain whisky and blended in with single malt whisky, and the single malt's heavily peated. And of course, as you probably know, Black Bottle at that point was a really, really good peated blend, one of the few. And a young lady came up in her best party dress, because there'd been a few university students coming in midweek, because they're the ones that have got the money to spend midweek in a bar, and all dressed up in their nines for their night out, and they're scanning up and down. She's scanning up and down with her pal. She says, where's the tequila? We were told there was tequila here. And of course, all the guys over at the table they're sitting at are pissing themselves laughing because they've sent up the ladies for a cocktail to a whiskey table which has one blend and one malt. And it was quite entertaining because I'd had a few at that point. And it was all free. So, hey, magical moments, malt mates. Here's another bottle I have in my stash. This is... It was very reasonably priced when I bought it. I bought this back about... In fact, I bought it in 2012 or 13. It's really... I'd say it's probably about an 88 out of 100. Heavily peated Bunnahabhain. And the reason is that at this point, the heavily peated was just beginning to appear in the market, and there weren't that many versions of it. And I knew there would be official bottlings at some point, but the only way to try it was to get an independent bottling, which so happened to be Signatory, because Signatory have a tremendous range of distilleries that they source from for bottling under their own label. And the fact is, I just never got round to opening it. But I will someday. There it is. Sherry cask matured. Matured in hogsheads. Hogsheads. So it's not a single cask. It's a several cask whisky. Already, I don't know if you can see the haze in that bottle. Very slight haze of non-chill filtration. I mean, already back then, about 2010, most whiskies that I'm putting aside are integrity bottlings, cask strength, age statement, ones that I've checked out the quality before I even buy them. But I mean, I've been to Bunnahabhain Distillery now for a visit. It was kind of slightly formal. I mean, they're lovely folk there, very friendly, but it was really just to kind of see the place, because I was actually over in Islay for a wedding, so I didn't have an awful lot of time to kind of do the tours or anything. Although, to be honest, I'm at the point now that I've done that many tours that I'm all toured out. I just can't face going on a public tour around a distillery anymore, where the barley's being explained to me and the grist and the purity of the water and all the rest of it. It comes a point you just switch off to all that because you've moved on. It'll happen to you, by the way. It will happen to you. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. The question one question you're probably wanting to ask me is, hey Ralphie, where does Bunnahabhain go next? And that's a really interesting question, because there may be a change in ownership in the near future, or there may not. It's all about up in the air. It's all about the money. It's all about the money. But the problem is, when anybody out there is buying a distillery these days, any business, it's a vast amount of money. Far more than the business is actually worth. But the reason the prices are so high is that the buyer of the distillery is buying the catalogue of whisky casks in the warehouse. That's what's really shooting the price of buying a distillery or a distillery business up. And also the increased awareness that the energy costs and ingredient costs are absolutely rocketing. Particularly energy. Producing whisky is a very energy intensive business, and many of the distilleries are firing their boilers on gas, and at the moment gas is absurdly and unrealistically expensive because it's part of a big political shakedown game that's happening on a global stage, and that's my opinion. It's just my opinion, malt mates, so take of it what you wish and leave the rest. The future of Bunnahabhain, I think there will be some good bottlings, but it really depends on demand. It really depends on a significant proportion of customers and consumers saying, sorry, the budget's tighter, the tighter and tighter, all whisky is discretionary spending. And what will happen is when sales go down, quality will come up. Because the first weapon that a distillery has at its disposal to redress falling costs due to changing social economic conditions is to all of a sudden find these wonderful casks in their warehouse, which, oh my goodness, aren't these casks amazing? The reverse is true, by the way. Can we talk about this? I mean, it's nothing controversial, but it's just practical business facts. That when the going is really good, when sales are easy and people are just prepared to pay the money without question for a bottle of whiskey, the managers of distilleries are going to go to the warehouse supervisor and say, right, let's kind of lose some of these weak casks in the mix. And they'll probably be very selective about which batches they do. So, for example, a British batch will get inferior casks because British people are far too polite, far too tolerant, and will accept it. Whereas for the German market, because Germans are fussy, know what quality is, and demand quality because they're paying for it, they'll get better batches. Am I wrong? Tell me if I am in the comments below. I hope you've enjoyed this little monologue. It's my journey with Bunahab, and the journey will continue, but I have to say, with the price of Bunah, it's going to continue with independent bottlings and younger age state independent bottlings. In fact, to be honest, my stash is probably going to be joined by a few more signatory Bunahs before the year is out, in preparation for the moment in time where whiskey's just too expensive and is only for the super rich. Do you think that day will come? I don't, because whiskey, despite what we're told, is actually very, very easy to make, and there's more people and more people out there just doing it themselves and keeping quiet about it and don't say anything. And I'd just like to conclude by saying that I do not condone that in any way at all. Because they're breaking the law. Unless you're in New Zealand. But they haven't changed the law there yet, but they probably will. I'm Ralphie. Thank you for watching. Click likey, subscribey, nice things. And if you want to join me in my Patreon channel, please join up in the next couple of days to get the live stream, which will be coming here from the Bothy, last a couple of hours. I may as well mention it because I've got a nice little clan on my Patreon channel, and I give some extra videos and content and advice and all the rest of it because it's the way things are morphing, it's the way things are evolving. Thanks for watching, see you soon.